Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Amateur Radio General Class, session number 16. During our previous session, we dealt with the following topics: reducing transmitter interference by grounding. We also discussed grounding loops, as well as bonding. We talked about grounding and its importance in RF voltages and reducing RF burn risk. We also talked specifically about grounding and bonding and the differences. We also talked about interference from electrical noise. We then discussed the feature of radios called speech processors. We also discussed the S meter. And then we went on to talk about what is a band edge or band edges and the frequency range. We also talked about mobile operations and specifically the power supply that we use. We talked about some challenges in mobile operations, such as interference from vehicles, engine noise, as well as what type of antennas we use for HF mobile operations. Then we discussed solar cells, and specifically we talked about cells that are connected in series parallel. We also talked about, in reference to solar panels and connecting to batteries, the use of a series diode. And we also discussed solar panels and charging of lithium iron phosphate batteries. Then we went on to discuss phone operations or voice operations, single sideband, also USB, upper sideband and lower sideband. And then we ended with phone operations, making contact, and some radio settings. So the agenda for this evening, we will be discussing the voluntary band plan. We'll talk about the minimum frequency separation for single sideband and Morse code operation. We also talk about what happens when we are on air and propagation changes. We'll also discuss assisting other amateurs when there's an emergency. We'll talk about what RACES, the organization RACES, is about. We'll also discuss Morse code operations or CW operations, the speed of sending and receiving Morse code, as well as what is zero beat. We'll also talk about how do we operate on Morse code, and specifically what signal reports are used during that operation. And sticking with Morse code operations, also we'll talk about what Q codes or Q signals are, as well as pro signs. We will also discuss, in respect of Morse code, what is full break-in telegraphy. Then we go on to talk about the volunteer monitoring program, what it is. We'll also delve into HF operations and mapping and long path contacts, azimuthal maps and so on. We will also talk about how do we call CQ, what that is about, and how do we identify ourselves on the HF bands and what the phonetic alphabet is about, how we use it. And we'll also talk about what CQDX is, the concept of breaking in, and what signal reports are, as well as we will discuss QRP operation and the need to keep a station log. After that, we will wrap up with a question pool review that covers all of the theory we would have covered. So let's get going. Again, for persons who probably joining this live on YouTube for the first time and seeing this session, just to let you know, this is level 2 in the amateur radio course, the general class level. But there's a previous course called the technician class course, and that's on your screen should you decide to take a look at that course. So level 1 is called the technician class, and on your screen are the links to access that full course, including all of the handouts for it. That level 1 technician class. That's the previous level. We are presently doing the general class level. This is our syllabus. A reminder that everyone in the course by now should have been attempting practice exams. These are the links to generate practice tests. Again, a bit about Zello. People have been asking, how do we use Zello? Where do we access Zello? And what channel do we use to operate in the organization called React? It's on your screen. You can look at that at your own time. Also, this slide is very important to all of us in this particular class or course. It's the links or the links to both all of the documents that are provided to participants, inclusive of these that are on your screen, as well as the entire slide deck. And at the bottom would be the link to access the playlist of videos from all the sessions. We're session number 16. So 1 to 15 are recorded, and they're there sequentially for you to review. If you missed any, or if you just want to look at something that you would have covered before, and just as a reminder. So feel free to also to share this with anyone that you think would be interested in this course. All right, so we are using the No Nonsense General Class License Study Guide in this particular course. So here's the link to the book if you have not already availed yourself. It's optional, however, highly recommended. And of course, we have other texts that we recommend that you consider procuring. Again, it's entirely up to you. No obligation, but highly recommended to avail yourselves of material that will help you in your exam preparation, as well as to look at information, the specific topics from a different author's perspective, which can also be helpful to understand, as well as for additional insight and information. We have no questions from the last session, so we get straight on into the theory for this evening, and we begin by talking about operating courtesy. Now, courtesy is contagious, right? It's very important as amateur radio operators, notwithstanding our personalities, our various attitudes, and everything else about us. We need to operate with courtesy as an amateur radio operator. We're not getting on the air and we're playing big and bad and boldface and, bullying and all that. That's not amateur radio. That's not the spirit of amateur radio. And if you're a participant in this class, in this course, and you're going to tell anyone that, we certainly expect that you will represent. And one of the ways to do so is to show that you are aware of very good behavior, or best behavior, operating courtesy. So we'll be talking a bit about some of those procedures that when we utilize or follow, it will indicate that we are operating in a courteous manner. So first up, we're saying that when we are getting on the air, in other words, we become a licensed amateur radio operator, we have our equipment, we're getting on the air, whether it's VHF, EHF, whatever have you. One of the things we need to do is to make sure before we transmit, before we press that push to talk, before we speak and have our signal go over the air, whatever the band is. And even if we're using other types of modes that may be using voice over IP, whichever mode that we're using as a communicator, we need to make sure that we do not cause interference, and specifically we do not cause harmful interference. In other words, we should not be interfering inappropriately with anyone. So if someone is already speaking, we should not somehow try and run over them. Maybe we might have a more powerful station, a stronger station, or we may be positioned in such a way. But that's not what amateur radio is about. Remember, courtesy is contagious. So what we should do is seek to, first of all, establish that no one is speaking or no one is transmitting. In other words, check to make sure that the frequency that we are going to be using appears to be clear. Now, the frequency may not actually be clear, because of how propagation works and so on. You may not be hearing other hams around different parts of the world transmitting. But what we, each and every one of us, need to do is go out of our way, and to the extent as best as reasonably practicable, we need to make sure that there's no transmission. And one of the ways to do that is to listen. So you listen for a little while before transmitting. So that is one of the ways we can be courteous, because if I just soon as I turn on my radio, I tune into a frequency and then I start to transmit. How is that being courteous? I may walk all over, I may transmit over another amateur radio operator. And if I don't transmit over the person, there may be a squeal or heterodyne or a tone, and that's causing interference, right? And to some extent it might even be harmful interference, especially if there's an ongoing transmission, or what we call a QSO, especially if that transmission has to do with an emergency. So hopefully we have understood the importance of trained amateur radio operators, and especially if you're in this course, to represent with good courtesy. So before we call CQ, before we call to say, hey, is there anyone that would like to speak with us? Anyone that's available for a quick call? We need to check to make sure that the frequency is clear. So how do we actually make a call when we're operating on the air? So we have a couple of options. So if we're operating Morse code or CW mode, what you do is you send the letters QRL, Quebec Romeo Lima, QRL, then your call sign. So if my call sign is 9 Yankee for Romeo, on Morse code, I will click out QRL and then 9Y4R. So that's how you make a call when you want to, that's how you establish that your the frequency is going to be used, you want to use it, that it's clear. That's what you need to do. If you're using voice, you're speaking on the air, what you do is you simply state frequency in use and then your call sign. So you'll say, is this frequency in use? 9 Yankee for Romeo. That's an example of what you can say. It's not the only thing you can say, but it is a good way, I believe. It's courteous, very friendly, and it's also trying to avoid harmful interference. Again, I press my push to talk, I get in the air and I say, is this frequency in use? This is 9 Yankee for Romeo, for example. Or some version of that, something very nice, short, crisp, but also meaningful. And we listen to see if anyone says, yes, there's a QSO, there's a conversation in progress. And then, okay, we know that if we have not heard that, we could probably repeat it again, or just, can go ahead and use the frequency. But we must ask first, is the frequency in use? And we must also, as we will see, identify your call sign. You must always state your station call sign, your amateur radio call sign. You must identify, and that's a very important concept in amateur radio, identifying ourselves. We have a name, and that name is the call sign. So it's important that we identify. So just a bit of information that's also on the exam. What does the Q code or the Q signal QRL mean? It means, are you busy? Or it could also be interpreted as, is this frequency in use? So either of those two will be what QRL will be interpreted, and that will be an exam question. All right, so courtesy is contagious. All right, so while as amateur radio operators, we have access to quite a lot of spectrum in various bands, in the HF band, in the VHF band, in the UHF band, and sort of all over the spectrum, amateur radio operators have access to quite a bit of spectrum. However, that spectrum that we have to use it responsibly. So we don't just choose a frequency and use it with any mode, any amount of power, and all of that. We need to observe what is called the band plan. And the band plan, we are calling it a voluntary band plan because it's by convention. Certainly, the spectrum that we can use is by law, right? That is in regulations and so on. And we must and shall use those frequencies that we are allowed when we get our license. We are permitted to use certain frequencies, but within those frequency ranges are further dissected or segmented really into portions that says this portion will be used for Morse code or digital mode only, or this segment is used for voice only. And part of it would be to make sure that you're operating in the correct mode for the range of frequencies that you will be operating on. So in doing so, you can also avoid causing harmful interference. For example, if you go on a frequency that is normally used for Morse code or for CW mode, and you start to speak, then that would be you causing harmful interference to those persons who are doing Morse code. Or if you were to go on a part of the frequency that will be typically used for, let's say, one of the other digital modes, and you start to use Morse code in it, or CW, then you could be causing harmful interference. You'll be out of scope. You will not be following that band plan or the voluntary band plan that's often established by the International Amateur Radio Union, as well as other jurisdictions that will specify a band plan for the frequencies that are permitted and used in those jurisdictions. So we need to be aware of the band plans. And on your screen is an example of what the band plan chart for the US looks like. And we have just sort of exploded or honed in on a particular band, the 6-meter band, which is 50 to 54 megahertz. And we are seeing that from 50 to 50.1, that's for CW or Morse code and beacons. 50.060 to 50.080, that's beacons, 50.1 to 50.3, that's single sideband CW, right? But for the exam, there's an exam question that will ask us what part of the 6-meter band is used for DX or long distance or out of country operation, and that is 50.10 to 50.125. And this is an exam question, and hence the reason it's highlighted. So let's deal with the bullet points, which are exam questions. So we say that another way to avoid harmful interference and to comply with commonly accepted amateur radio practice, or what we call good amateur radio practice, when we are choosing a frequency on which to initiate a call, is to follow the voluntary band plan for the operating mode you intend to use. And again, on your screen here is an example of what the voluntary band plan or band chart looks like, right? And we will certainly circulate a PDF high-res version of this to all students probably in the next circulation, so you can look at this. So it has all of the frequencies that we can are permitted to use, as well as what the modes are. And of course, on this band plan, it shows the difference between if you have, let's say, what was called a novice class at the time, what's a technician class, what was called the general class, sorry, what is called the general class, what was called the advanced class, and also even what is called the extra class, right? So some of these classes are grandfathered. You can no longer get a new license for them, but they still exist. Again, the novice and the advanced classes, those existed before, but right now we only speak about the technician, general, extra as what you can take exams for today. But just bear in mind they are grandfathered classes, and you will see those on the band plan. And you'll see that as a technician, you can use a particular portion of the band. As another class of licensee, you can use more, if not all of the band, and so on, right? So that's what the band plan is trying to show here. And also for the particular frequency you have access to, some of it will permit only, let's say, RTTY and data. Some of it will allow for voice or phone operation. Some of it, is single sideband only, and some of it is CW or Morse code only. So this voluntary band plan should be respected, and if you do so, then you will be operating with courtesy, you will be operating using good amateur radio practice, and you will be a model amateur radio operator or model ham, and an example for others to follow. So another exam question in relation to the voluntary band plan is that an example of a voluntary band plan restriction for U.S. stations transmitting within the 48 contiguous states, that's the United States of America, in the 50.1 to 50.125 megahertz band, that is, it's also called the DX window, and DX means long distance, is that an operator may only make contact with stations not within the 48 contiguous states. So let's dissect what this means. This means that if you are a licensed amateur radio operator in the United States, and this is what these exams are for. We're preparing for US exams, of course, except that some other countries, other territories like Trinidad and Tobago and other Caribbean countries, if you do those exams, you can in fact operate, or rather you can apply for a license in those territories. But these exams we're doing permit you to, once you pass, you get your US license, you can operate in the United States. And what we're saying here in this bullet point is that if you are operating in the United States with a United States license, on this frequency band, this segment of the band, you should not be trying to communicate with another station in the United States. This is for you to be able to communicate with someone that's outside of the United States. And that's what this whole, 48 contiguous states, if you're transmitting within, you should not make contact with someone that's not within the 48 contiguous states. So that just means that this frequency range, and we have highlighted it here on the band plan as well, the exploded version of the band plan, that this is called the DX window, right? So you need to learn this frequency range when they ask you about the restriction on this frequency band and not being able to use it within the US or within the contiguous 48 contiguous states. This is the frequency band, 50.1 or 50.1 to 50.125 megahertz. That's in the 6 meter band. So let's continue. All right, so again, we're sticking with the idea of, courtesy, as well as sticking within our license, operating good amateur radio practice. And we need to be aware that when we are transmitting on a frequency, we need to make sure that we leave enough separation to another operator that may be transmitting on another frequency. In other words, we should not go too close to them. But exactly how much is too close? Well, we actually specify it for a particular band or a particular mode of operations, right? So in this case, we are saying here that when we are using single sideband or SSB, we need to ensure that the separation between our transmission, our signal, and another operator that may be having another conversation a little up or a little down the band from us, we need to make sure that we have a minimum separation. If we are doing single sideband, that is SSB, minimum of 2 kilohertz to 3 kilohertz, right? So that's the minimum. We can go a little more, but we should not be any less, because if you were to select less of a separation, we are too close to the other signal, we may impact that signal, we may overlap, and we may cause interference to that other operator, right? So just bear that in mind. For single sideband, it's an exam question. The minimum separation for SSB is between 2 kilohertz to 3 kilohertz. Yeah? All right, also, similarly, if we are operating Morse code or CW, remember is continuous wave, but anytime we hear CW, think Morse code, right? Dits and das. Whereas single sideband requires us to maintain a separation. In other words, the lane separation needs to be 2 to 3 kilohertz. In the case of CW, we need to be between 150 hertz to 500 hertz. So notice the difference here. For single sideband, it's a much larger separation, 2 kilohertz, which is 2000 hertz to 3000 hertz. Whereas for CW or Morse code, it's a mere 150 hertz and 500 hertz. That's the range minimum separation that we should try to keep. So you notice it's not 150 kilohertz, right? It's 150 hertz. Up here we have 2 kilohertz. So 2 kilohertz, if you remember the units, kilo, 1,000, so that's 2,000 hertz to 3,000 hertz. This is 150 hertz to 500 hertz for CW. So again, compare and contrasting the minimum separation that we need between signals for single sideband and the minimum separation that we need for signals operating on CW. So when we're dialing using our tuning dial on our radio to tune the frequency that we're going to transmit or receive on, we need to make sure that we are separate. We'll hear the other station, and when we hear that station talking, or the pair of stations speaking, or how many of them there are on that frequency, and we want to transmit to talk to someone else and use a different frequency, we need to make sure that we tune that dial and separate it according to the mode with sufficient separation so that we do not cause interference with another. And of course, they will not, or hopefully not, cause interference to us. All right, let's do a couple more slides before we take our break. So the question is, what happens when, we did say earlier that, when we're going to start to transmit and we want to talk to another ham and we want to call CQ and find out if there's anyone else there that's listening that would like to talk with us, or maybe we have a scad, and we agree to meet up at a certain time with another amateur radio operator on the bands and we tune up our radio. We did say that we listen first to see if there are any transmissions in effect or any transmissions occurring. And we did say also that we make all reasonable efforts, but we may not actually be able to hear all of the transmissions because propagation doesn't permit us to hear all. So we may think that the band is clear, and that's fine. We go ahead and transmit and someone may respond and we're talking with them. But then remember we talked about the ionosphere and the sunspot cycle and the fact that the sun moves overhead, and that causes changes in the various layers of the ionosphere, and band conditions may change, right? So propagation may change. And while we are talking, propagation is changing or could be changing. All of a sudden, a station that we were not hearing when we first listened to see that the band was clear, all of a sudden we're hearing another transmission of other operators. And it may come in a little bit slowly, a little bit, very weak in the background. We start to hear them and then all of a sudden they're loud. What do we do when that occurs? In other words, all of a sudden we recognize that we may be causing interference to another transmission, or they may cause interference with us. Well, it's an exam question. What do you do? Do you try to bully the person and tell them that you're there first? Well, you should know by now that we said, of course, courtesy is contagious, and as hams, as amateur radio operators, we strive for courtesy. We strive to be as nice as possible. That is what the spirit of amateur radio is. We should not try to, somehow bully someone and tell them we're here first, and then they, tit for tat, they will start to argue. Well, no, we were there first, and who proves what? That's not what amateur radio is about at all. So what we do is we decide to cooperate. That is what we must decide to do, to cooperate, be nice to each other, and we work it out. We try together to solve the problem. So that's bullet point number 1. If propagation changes during a contact, creating interference from other stations using the frequency, good amateur practice is to attempt to resolve the interference problem with the other stations in a mutually acceptable manner. I mean, be nice, right? Let's work it out. Let's work together. So we may say, okay, well, here's what. I will shift my frequency with the other operator down a bit or up a bit. Or the other person may first volunteer. And, we say, okay, sure, no problem. Thank you very much, And we thank each other for cooperating and solve the interference problem. And if the interference comes back again or someone else interferes, we just continue doing that, right? So that is how we operate as amateur radio operator. There's no room for bullying or, sort of territorial and I own this frequency, which is the actual subject of the next bullet point. So concerning access to frequencies, except during emergencies, so that's the exception. No amateur has priority access to any frequency. In other words, we don't own any frequency. There may be conventionally, we'll use a frequency for nets. Conventionally, when we come up on the air, we'll use a particular frequency and so on. But we don't have some sort of absolute right to that frequency because we have our license and we are custom using a frequency. There's no ownership in that sense. It's shared. It's just like the road, right? Although some of us sometimes drive as though we own the road, right? A lane on a highway is for us to share and we need to be courteous. So it's really the same concept. While we're in that lane, we utilize it and we give way, we try to cooperate and we make sure that each of us can all use the road in a safe manner. Same thing on the frequency. We do not own any and therefore we cannot say that I have priority over you or you have priority over me. The little exception there that we note is in an emergency. In an emergency, you don't want to be giving that person handling the emergency a hard time, shift off, and go and find a frequency. If they're operating there, you should give way to that emergency and just be nice about it. If you were causing, if you say, just apologize, sorry about that, continue on with the emergency. Matter of fact, offer to help. Say, I'm standing by if you need my help. So again, coming back to the spirit of amateur radio, courtesy, being helpful, assisting in emergencies, that is what we do. That is what amateur radio or ham radio is about. That's a spirit. So we do not own any frequency and we give way to emergencies. All right. So these are 2 exam questions on your screen. So now might be actually a good time to take a short 2-minute break. So folks, maybe get up, take a little stretch, have a bathroom break, maybe have a little bit of water, and we'll meet you back in approximately 2 minutes time. All right. Welcome back, everyone. Okay, yes, good evening to you, Adish. Great to have you. Okay, we have a question from Trisha. So Trisha asks, class on Carnival Friday. Okay, so that's a very good question. I'll answer it this way. We have no plans not to have the class, right? But the thing is, I will actually be traveling during that period. So I would rather skip the date, again, because we try to record all the sessions and we're also trying to achieve completion of the class. At this point, the only reason that we'll probably not end up having a class, I mean, God's willing, is if for some reason while I'm traveling, the internet service is not that great, right? So yes, Trisha, we will be scheduling the next session next week, Friday, Fantastic Friday, right? So yeah, we have just been trying to press on and just kind of get it done, right? So hope that's okay with everyone. But once the recording sticks as well, you won't miss out, right? So excellent question there, Trisha. Thanks for that. All right, so courtesy is contagious, right? All right, so let's talk a bit about emergencies. So a lot of amateur radio, and the reason why amateur radio exists in a way and why governments make all of that spectrum available, the governing bodies make it available at what is considered to be a very, very good rate compared to, let's say, commercial rates to access spectrum, is because hams are expected to assist in emergencies, right? So amateur radio is a hobby, yes. It's also a service, as we would have described the early parts of the course. And to the extent that each and every one of us are able to give service, to assist one way or the other in emergency preparations or emergency response or disaster risk reduction or anything along those lines, amateur radio really shines when any other forms of terrestrial communication fails. Resilience is one of the hallmarks or key in amateur radio operation. So of course, as a ham, we are allowed to just about do anything to assist anyone that is in distress when there's an actual emergency, right? Remember, if there's life at stake, we have to do what we can to preserve life, right? So that doesn't mean we should go about breaking the law or doing things we shouldn't do. But once there's an emergency, life is at risk, save the life, right? Assist in that emergency in the best way that you can. And that's one of the reasons we're all being trained, so we understand what are some of the risks involved, what safety is about, and how and what we must do and operate. So a lot of it becomes clearer as we go along further and as we become more advanced and more experienced. What are some of the limits that may exist out there? But just note that as hams, we assist others during times of emergencies and disasters. So question is, if there's a disaster or there's a distress call that needs to be sent out, what frequency do I use? Well, whichever frequency that can actually get you heard, right? So whichever there's the best chance of communicating that distress message, right? So that's generic information. So what happens if we are talking on air? I'm speaking with another ham radio operator. We're having a casual conversation. Maybe we are discussing a technical topic. Maybe we're talking about how artificial intelligence impacts amateur radio. Maybe that's the topic on the air. Or we're talking about something else. And then we hear another station on the frequency that we're operating say that they are in need of assistance or there's a distress call, right? What do you do? Or what's the first thing you do? And that's the last bullet point on this slide, right? So let's read that out. The first thing to do if you are communicating with another amateur station and hear a station in distress, break in. Right? That means that while you're talking, you hear the call sign on another amateur radio operator. Whatever they say, they may say something like 9 Yankee 4 Romeo emergency or some other whatever, they can muster up at that point, especially if they're in distress. They could say anything. If they're trained, they may be a little calmer and say something. But A person who is in a dire straits may say anything. And what we need to do is acknowledge the station that's in distress and find out how we can assist. Determine what assistance may be necessary. How may I help you? How may we help you? That's the first thing you do. If you don't put them on hold, you don't say, hey, I'm here now, I'm actually having a conversation, I'll get back to you when I'm finished. No, they're in distress, it's an emergency. So we are trained amateur radio operators, and we know that second nature. So that shouldn't come as a surprise to us. We should not be in a conversation and not know what to do if we hear a distress call. We should know. As a matter of fact, that's why we exist in a large form, to be able to receive such emergency message and distress calls, right? We call emergency communications. So that last bullet point on your screen is an exam question. The first thing to do if you're communicating with another amateur station and hear a station in distress break in, acknowledge the station in distress and determine what assistance may be needed. So again, when all else fails, there's amateur radio. Okay. So we now come to an organization called RACES. But what is RACES? It's an acronym, and it stands for Radio Amateur Civil Emergency Service. That's RACES. It's an acronym. And it's a protocol that's been put in place by FEMA in the US as well as the FCC, and it can be activated in certain times of emergencies, right? So that's what RACES is about. So we have a couple of exam questions in relation to RACES. So on your right-hand side here, that's the logo for RACES, right? But the exam questions are as follows. It has to do firstly with the control operator. In other words, that's the person that is at the amateur radio equipment and speaking, right? So the control operator of an amateur station transmitting in RACES to assist relief operations during a disaster shall be only a person holding an FCC issued amateur operator license. In other words, for you to participate in RACES, for you to be a RACES operator, then you need to be a licensed ham. You need to have that FCC issued amateur operator license, right? So RACES membership or RACES participation requires a license, which is what we are preparing for. So because RACES are about emergencies, you would say, well, all right, we need to practice, we need to conduct exercises or drills, as sometimes we'll call it, or tests. We need to carry that out. And that is true about RACES operations. But we need to be aware, and this is an exam question, RACES may routinely conduct training drills and tests without special authorization, but no more than 1 hour per week. So yes, you can do your tests, you can do your drills, you can do your practice, you can do your exercises as a member of RACES without, getting approvals. But you have a limit. No more than 1 hour per week. That's an exam question. So in terms of emergencies, or even just generally operating, but certainly in emergencies, if you're operating on air, let's say you're on HF and you're speaking to another amateur radio operator and you're passing emergency traffic, health and welfare traffic, for example, and all of a sudden now the band condition changes and the signal starts to fade, you're not hearing each other well, it could be voice communication, it could be digital mode, whatever it is, the conditions start to deteriorate. Or maybe there's some interference that comes up from atmospheric noise, or maybe there's some other transmitter, or maybe an over-the-horizon radar that's started to be activated on the frequency nearby, and you can no longer communicate. What do? Do you just throw your hands up in the air and say, well, we have interference? No. As a good amateur radio operator, as an experienced amateur radio operator, as a trained amateur radio operator, someone who's practicing for emergencies, we need to make sure that we have backup frequencies that are known that we can switch to in case the conditions disappear. We can switch to another band, another frequency, or in case there's interference. And we need to know that. We need to have had that prior arrangement. So that's the bullet point, exam question. Good amateur practice for net management is to have a backup frequency in case of interference or poor conditions. Exam question. All right, so we come to talk a bit about Morse code operations now. So On your right-hand side of the screen, we have various letters and things that we communicate when we're using Morse code. Remember, Morse code is dits and das. Some people say dots and dashes, right? But dits and das. And when we are sending or even receiving Morse code, we can either speed up or slow down sending. So we did show previous slides, what the Morse code key looks like, whether it's a regular straight key or it could be the paddle type key or one of those other types of fancy keys. Whichever, you can increase the rate of sending the Morse code, or even if you're using a keyboard with a Morse code key and so on, right? You can increase how many words per minute. You can go up, you can go down, maybe 15 words per minute, 20 words, 25, 35, or more. But here's the thing about it. When you're sending Morse code or you're receiving Morse code, what is the best speed to use? Right? That's a question. Should I use 15 words per minute? Should I use 20 words per minute? What's the best speed? And the answer, quite simply, is you communicate at the fastest speed possible that you could understand, right? So it doesn't make sense trying to receive, you're sending and receiving Morse code and trying to receive more than you can chew, right? You'll be frustrated, you'll miss a lot, and there'll be a lot of resending. So what you do is you each go at a speed that's the fastest, though, that you can tolerate. So that's an exam question. When communicating using CW or Morse code, the best speed when answering a CQ, remember someone is calling you, is the fastest speed at which you are comfortable copying, but no faster than the CQ, meaning the other amateur. So someone is saying CQ, either CQDX or CQ and giving their call sign. In other words, they are on the air, they're ready to do Morse code, they don't know who else is on the air, and they're calling CQ so that other amateur radio operators who hear them can respond. But when you are responding, do not send any faster than they're sending, but also don't send any faster that you could copy at. Right? So that's the speed, the best speed, and it's an exam question. So in Morse code operations, so we can transmit CW, we can transmit Morse code, and we can also receive Morse code. So when we are listening with our ears, we are hearing dits and das. And sometimes we may be on a particular frequency, and as we tune, we are hearing the Morse code that is coming, right? So what we need to do is to make sure that we match the transmit frequency that we will be using to send our Morse code to the received frequency that is coming in. And when we do that using the dials on the radio, that is called zero beating or zero beat. So that's an exam question. In CW or Morse code operation, the term used to describe matching the transmit frequency to the frequency of a received signal is zero beat. So you're hearing that Morse code operator transmitting on a particular frequency, you're receiving it, and what you do is you tune or match your transmit frequency to that frequency, and that's called zero beat. All right, sticking with Morse code again. When we communicate with each other, it is typical and highly recommended that we tell each other about how we are hearing the other amateur radio operator. How are they sounding? Are they sounding loud and clear? Are they sounding weak and fading or noisy? But apart from giving an idea in our perception what that other amateur radio is sounding like, we actually have a very formal way of communicating what is called a signal report. And in the case of CW or Morse code, there are three parameters that can be provided when you're giving that signal report. It's called R, S, and T. And the R is for readability, the S is for signal strength, and the T is for tone. So RST, that's where RST comes from, it's the first letter of these words. And we have a nice trusty table here that gives you a little idea. For readability, what are the ranges of values? It ranges from 1 to 5. For signal strength, what are the ranges of values? It can go from 1 to 9. And what is the values for the tone? It can go from 1 to 9 also. So you can have a signal, an RST of 599, and that simply means it's perfectly readable, it's very strong, and perfect tune, no hum or modulation. Or it could be some other combination. So this is what we refer to as the RST report, right? Readability, signal strength, and tone. We do have an exam question in relation to the signal report, and that is when using CW or Morse code, we add the letter C to our RST. So after we give whatever it is, whatever numbers, the combination of those three numbers, we have a suffix, or we end with the letter C, and we need to know what that means. It's an exam question. So when sending CW or Morse code, and the letter C is added to the RST report. Remember what the RST report is? It's readability, signal strength, and tone. It's a combination selecting one value from each of these columns based on what you perceive. Is it unreadable, barely readable, readable but with difficulty, almost perfectly readable, or perfectly readable? That's the readability. Signal strength, is it faint, or is it all the way up to very strong? The tone, and this applies only to Morse code, right? If you have voice, you just give R and S. You don't give the T. But RST applies to CW or Morse code. And if you put the letter C afterwards and you add it to the RST, it means that the signal is chirpy or unstable. All right, so this is an exam question. What the letter C means when you add it to an RST report. So there's also another type of code, if you want to call it that. We call it the Q signals. Why do we call it the Q signals? Because it's a three-letter code, or Q signal, and they all start with the letter, you guessed it, Q, or Quebec. So it will be QRS, or QSL, or QRN, or QRV, all right? Those are short ways. I mean, you send it in CW. I mean, we sometimes voice it as well. But in CW, it's really an abbreviation to make your what would otherwise be a very long, lengthy transmission. You just send those three letters and their meaning. So that's why we say sometimes called the Q code or Q signals. All right, it's a three-letter abbreviation. And if you look on your screen, you'll see several Q codes. Don't need to learn all of them, but they're just here for your reference. What is QRL? What is QRV? What is QSL? What is QSO? And some of them, though, we do need to learn for the exams. So often using CW to make our sending less pedantic, less difficult, less strain on our fingers and our wrists. So the ones that we need to know for the exam. QRS, it means send slower. So if you look at it, QRS, send slower. QSL, that means I have received and understood what you have said, right? So QSL, so somebody is giving you a message, you say QSL. That means you acknowledge what they have said and you have comprehended what they have said. So I've received and understood. That's what QSL means. And then there's QRN. What that means is that you're getting static, you're receiving static, you're hearing static on their transmission. So you tell them QRN. And when you are on the air, you are on frequency and you are ready to receive messages, you send a QRV. That means you're on the air and I'm ready to receive. So these are the four that we need to learn for the exam. QRS, send slower. QSL, I've received and understood. QRN, I'm troubled by static. And QRV, I'm ready to receive. So there are also what we call pro signs that we use when we are sending Morse code or CW, right? So it's not just the regular letters. There are some combination of letters, standalone letters. When we send them, usually at the end of a particular transmission, there are specific meanings. So on the right-hand side, we have several of these, what are referred to as pro signs. So these are the pro signs here, and to your right, what each pro sign mean. So it usually is an instruction. It usually means that the ham is sending some kind of instruction to the other amateur radio operator. It's essentially a signal for something, right? On your right-hand side, we have a few of them. But we don't need to learn all of them for this exam. The ones that we need to learn are KN or Kilo November. That means you're listening only for a specific station or stations. That's what KN mean. Only the station that you're calling should transmit or respond to you. KN means you're listening only for a specific station or stations. The other one is AR or Alpha Romeo. AR means that you have come to the end of a formal transmission or a formal message. So KN and AR are the two pro signs that we need to learn for the exam. They're right here in bullet points, yellow for you. We have some extra information here so you could see where these two come in and some of the others that exist. Take a look at those. All right. So we now come to talk about what is called full break-in when we are doing CW. Full break-in. So let's discuss that a little bit. Let's spend a little time to describe what full break-in is or how it's come about. So when we are sending Morse codes, right, that's dits and das, we are using our fingers maybe and we are tapping away at our Morse code key. And we are sending dit da, dit da, dit da, dit dit, and so on, right? We're sending our letters and we are communicating and then we're receiving letters from the other amateur radio operator and we are interpreting, okay, what does this mean? And we're writing it down, or maybe we are decoding in our head, or maybe we're using some software to decode. However, we're doing it. We are receiving a message. But when we are sending a message, you know, they say you can't speak and listen at the same time, right? While you're speaking, you can't be listening, right? Well, maybe some of us can. But in terms of a radio, when you're transmitting, you will not typically be receiving, right? Especially for a single VFO radio. As you key up your transmitter and you press your paddle or you press your Morse code key and it sends the dits and the das, we have it on the screen here as dots and dashes, beep, right? So a dash is 3 times the length of a dit, right? But when we send it, we also have spaces in between the dits and the das. Under normal circumstances, what a transceiver will do is, as I'm sending my dits and das, it will silence my receive, so I won't hear anything at all until I'm finished my message. But there's a mode I can use on my radio that while I'm sending, in between the spaces of the letters, in between the spaces of the words that I'm sending, it will actually receive what is being heard on the frequency. So it will not silence the radio in those brief moments between while I'm sending that Morse code. And when we turn that feature on, that is called full break-in mode, right? Now there's a reason why that we may want to allow or enable full break-in mode. It could be irritating, yes, but there's a good reason that that's a feature on many radios, full break-in. It is while I'm sending a message on Morse code, if there's an emergency on the frequency while I'm transmitting and another operator transmits that whose signal I can receive, in between my dits and das or between the letters of my transmissions, I will actually hear if there's another ham radio operator that starts to send dits and das also. If I do not enable full break-in mode, I will not be able to receive those transmissions in between the code that I'm sending. So in other words, it's a good emergency preparedness or emergency readiness approach to take, right? Or you may be expecting some emergency messages, so you enable it. Or you just want to make sure that in case someone transmits an emergency message while you are carry on your QSO, your conversation. So that is called full break-in mode or full break-in telegraphy, right? Sometimes called QSK, right? So full break-in CW operation or QSK allows transmitting stations to be able to receive between code characters and elements. That's what we just described. So as you do your Morse code is not a continuous tone. You have little spaces in between. And when you have those spaces in between, your receiver will activate and you will hear whatever is taking place on the frequency. And if someone transmits, like this one here, this is the emergency operator that's trying to send to me furiously. So I'm sending, did, and so on, sending. And there's an emergency. They don't wait until I'm finished. They will come and say, okay, emergency or SOS or whatever it is they will send. And between my transmissions, if I enable full break-in mode, I may hear their transmission and say, wait, there's a transmission below mine. Let me stop transmitting. Right? So that is essentially a preparedness form as an amateur radio operator to be able to receive an emergency transmission. All right. So I see there's a question. Let's see. Arthur is asking, is it possible to copy faster than the CQ? Yes, it really depends on your own capability. Someone may be calling CQ, and if they transmit faster afterwards, once you could copy, is really what you can copy, right? So you kind of need to negotiate that maximum, right? So what is speaking about when you are transmitting back to the CQ, you don't want to transmit any faster than they did, unless you all establish later on that they have that capability. They may have slowed down their CQ to allow, let's say, less advanced operators who are a little bit slower, right, to be able to hear the CQ in the first place, to be able to copy their call sign. But they may be capable of faster. So the short answer I would say is yes, Arthur. But it's subject to negotiation between the CW operators or Morse code operators on the air. They're probably going to be able to do faster, but they should negotiate that. And that's probably one of the things they can ask each other, what's your maximum capability as a Morse code? And they say, well, here, I can do 35 words per minute. The other person will say, cool, I can do that as well. So let's both do a 35 words per minute. Excellent question there, Arthur. Hope I've answered the question. All right. Let's see if we could make some progress and finish up these last couple, 4 or 5 slides, and then we can go into our question pool review. We are going just a little bit over time. Not much, just a little bit over time this evening. All right. So we have something that's known as the Volunteer Monitor Program, and we need to know what it is because these are exam questions. So let's read it off the slide. The Volunteer Monitoring Program consists of amateur volunteers who are formally enlisted to monitor the airwaves for rules violation. In other words, radio police, right? So these are volunteers. They are formally enlisted to do what? To monitor the airwaves, but for what? For rules violations, right? So that's why we say radio police, okay? So that's what the Volunteer Monitoring Program is. It's an exam question. Now, what are the objectives of this? Just to, be a bully to people, to say everything and they're not, is it that? Remember we said courtesy is contagious, we need to be courteous. But at the same time, not every amateur that come up may have the experience, or, not everyone is always well behaved. Not everyone has taken a class and have been told, hey, be on your best behavior, please, right? Or there are some, even if they're told that, they feel, I could do anything I want, right? There are people like that, unfortunately, right? But in amateur radio, we have this volunteer monitoring program, and the reason or the objectives for it are to encourage amateur radio operators to self-regulate and comply with the rules. So you see, it's all about us as a community knowing what is right and trying to do what is right. So that's why there's this program to help help each other to do the right thing and become good amateur radio operators with good amateur radio practice. So that's the objective of the volunteer monitoring program. But guess what? That ability that you can develop while you are involved in monitoring, because sometimes you have to do direction finding, you have to locate where a transmitter is. Maybe somebody is inadvertently transmitting, or they may in fact be deliberately transmitting, and they maybe not even unlicensed amateur radio operator, right? Because I would not like to think that someone who's duly educated, been part of a program like this, decides to go and do something that's illegal or improper. I mean, shudder to think, right? No one here in this class is like that, right? So, and invariably things happen, right? And we may need to locate a transmitter, and sometimes we could call that fox hunting, trying to locate, and we may use directional antennas like this. And in a field day, maybe we can do practicing of a fox hunt where there's a hidden transmitter and we try to locate it using direction finding equipment. And it's part of the hobby as well, part of the fun, but it will also be very serious as part of a person who was operating or participating in the volunteer monitoring program. And there is an exam question in relation to a volunteer monitor or someone who may be using this direction finding type equipment to locate a transmitter, someone who may be inadvertently keying up a repeater. Their radio is transmitting, maybe it's stuck between a couch, a cushion, and the push to talk is pressed. And they are tying up a repeater because the radio signal is going there. Nobody's actually using that radio, but it's keyed up. Or maybe they're deliberately doing it, and you have to go and locate where's that handheld or where's that radio that's keying up the repeater. So this is an exam question. It's the procedure used to localize a station whose carrier is holding a repeater, meaning having keyed up, keep repeater on in their area, is to compare beam headings on the repeater input from their home locations to that of other volunteer monitors. Let's dissect what this means. So there may be 2 or 3 amateur radio operators that's geographically located in separate parts, and we are all trying to locate the person who is transmitting their signal into the repeater that's keeping it keyed up. So that's why we say the repeater input frequency, because when they're transmitting, their output frequency of their radio is going to the input frequency of the repeater, and then the repeater is repeating it on the output frequency. So we need to listen to the input frequency of the repeater to see where the signal is coming in from that errant operator, right? And if 2 or 3 of us are doing it from different geographical locations, we are able to, from my location, I'll see, okay, this person is probably due east. From another ham radio operator, they may say, well, that's due north of me. Another amateur radio operator will say, hey, that's kind of west-northwest of me. And sometimes we refer to that process as triangulation. So we can now go on a map and say, well, if it's due east from somebody, due north from someone, and west-northwest from another person, we just go on a map and draw those lines, and they may intersect somewhere, and we say, you know what, this is likely the area that the signal is coming from, and we go find it. And that's why sometimes it's called a transmitter hunt or fox hunt or direction finding. Different terms it's used, but it's a skill that we can develop using sometimes antennas, Yagis, such as this one, that's a directional. Remember, we dealt with that Yagi's front lobe, very sensitive, side lobes, not so much, back lobe, it's attenuated. So we will use the property of these directional antennas to locate the direction of maximum signal strength. And if 2 or 3 of us do that, we can triangulate and locate where the errant signal is coming from. So this is an exam question. Okay, a couple more slides. So on your right-hand side, there's a map, and we call this the azimuthal projection map, right? And we have kind of, this one is actually centered on Trinidad and Tobago, and we have kind of zoomed in here to show that there are grid squares or location on the map that we can say, okay, this is Foxtrot Kilo, this is Golf Kilo, these are the squares, when we're trying to do, it's kind of like GPS locators. And this type of projection is called an azimuthal projection map. And the reason is that if I'm located here and another transmitter or another country or someone in another location is located here, I can use that direction because it will be the true bearing from my location to the other amateur radio operator. And the map that we use to determine that true bearing is called an azimuthal projection map. So this is what it actually looks like. We have zoomed on in here to the azimuthal projection map. So it's an exam question. In order to make contact with another amateur radio operators, it is useful to use an azimuthal projection map that shows the true bearing and distances from a particular location. So I'm located here in Trinidad and Tobago, and I'm trying to speak to someone in the United States. Well, this is their bearing for me, and this is also the distance. And this map that's used to do that is called an azimuthal projection map. Exam question. So we have some little extra information here that if I'm located here, you remember we talked about the long path and the short path, right? So we can use this map also to determine those things, right? All right. This is an extra slide that just talks about, we did deal with this a little bit before, where you can have atmospheric noise caused by lightning storms. So extra information, you can read this at your own time. Let's deal a couple of final slides before we go into our question pool review. So we did talk about calling CQ. Right? When we are on the air and we want to speak to another amateur radio operator, we call CQ. So we say a good way to indicate on a clear frequency in the HF phone bands that you're looking for a contact. In other words, you want to make conversation with someone, another amateur, licensed amateur radio operator. with any station is to repeat CQ a few times, followed by this is, then your call sign a few times, then pause to listen, repeat as necessary. So this is the procedure here. But let's actually instantiate that. So let us say I'm an amateur radio operator. I've tuned in to a frequency, maybe 7.159 lower sideband, and I'm on the air. I'm not hearing any amateur radio operators. I do the courteous thing. I listen, and there's no one there. I want to speak to someone, but I don't know who is there. I call CQ, and I give my call sign, and I listen. And this is how I'll do it. CQ, CQ, CQ. This is 9 Yankee 4 Romeo. 9 Yankee 4 Romeo. So that is the procedure when I want to chat with another ham or another amateur radio operator that's on air, but I do not know that they're there. I don't know their call sign, but I'm coming on saying, look, hey, I'm looking for contact. That's how I will do it. So this is an exam question. And notice when I gave my call sign, I said CQ, CQ, CQ. This is 9 Yankee 4 Romeo. I used the phonetic alphabet. I could have said this is 9Y4R, 9Y4R. However, it's good practice to use the phonetic alphabet. And that's the bullet point here. It's good practice to identify your station using the NATO phonetic alphabet, such as Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta. Right? So if, for example, on your right-hand side here, we have the phonetic alphabet. Right? So it's very good to learn. Highly recommended. I will say almost a necessity as a ham to learn this. So you can start Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, Foxtrot, and just, one way you're passing a store, you can spell it out, the name of the store. If you're looking at license plate, you can call it out in, phonetics, and that may help you become second nature, back of hand. So again, try and learn the phonetics as quickly as possible. It will help you. It also sounds a lot more, if I will use the word professional, when you use the phonetics as well. Okay, that's an exam question. Also, identifying, we talked about this earlier, identifying your station per normal FCC regulations is required when participating in a contest on HF frequency. So if I'm on air, and what is a contest really? A contest is where hams try to make contact with as many other hams as possible, and they can also earn points and even awards. So for example, there's the CQ Worldwide or the IARU HF contest, so several contests that exist. Remember we said amateur radio is a hobby as well, and many people go after those awards. It can be very competitive as well. You can be best in your country, best in a particular zone. They call it a CQ zone and so on. So contesting is very popular. You try to make as many contacts in a short space of time. So sometimes a contest is for 24 hours, sometimes it's for 2 days, and so on, right? The main point there is that when you are contesting, and generally in amateur radio, once you're going to be transmitting, you need to identify your station. You cannot be anonymous somehow. So I'm 9Y4R or 9 Yankee 4 Romeo. I need to give my call sign when I am on air and periodically repeat it also. So identifying a station per normal FCC regulations is required when participating in a contest on HF frequencies, and I will add to that, always required. You have to identify a station when you are on the air transmitting, right? Generally speaking. All right, so a couple more slides again to go. So generally, any station outside of the lower 48 states should respond to a station in the contiguous in the contiguous 48 states calling CQDX, right? So let's dissect what this means. Any stations outside of the lower 48 states, meaning if you're outside of the continental US, you respond to a station in the US that's calling CQDX, right? So what this is trying to tell us is CQDX is how we call and ask for a station that is outside of our territory to respond to us. In other words, we don't want a fellow country person to respond. So if I'm Trinidad and Tobago and I say CQDX, CQDX, I'm not expecting, I rather not a local 9 Yankee 4 or 9 Zulu 4 respond to me. I'm looking for Juliet 69 or November 4 or somebody else from some other country to respond to me. So I say CQDX, and DX long distance. Now, If there's a conversation that's taking place on the air on a frequency, let's say 14.280, for example, the conversation is going on up a sideband, and I would like to communicate. We call that breaking in if I want to make a contact while they're talking. So the recommended way to break into a phone or voice contact is to say your call sign once. So two persons, two hams are talking, it can be more than two, and they're carrying on a conversation, or QSO as we will call it. They're carrying on, right? They're actuing, or they're talking, they're having a conversation, and I would like to break in. I would like to say hello to them. I may want to participate. Maybe I have an opinion on what they're saying, or maybe I have a question, or I just want to probably let them know that I'm monitoring. The way to break into that conversation is during the pause in transmission, you simply state your call sign. So when I see one of the operators drop off, hopefully, and it's good practice to leave pauses between transmissions, especially for emergencies. When they are paused, I just simply key my push to talk and I say 9 Yankee for Romeo. That's it. That's how I break into the conversation or to the transmission. Now also, for the exam, we need to know that signal reports are typically exchanged at the beginning of an HF contact to allow each station to operate according to conditions. So from the time we have started to communicate, I will give the signal report to let them know, you are 5.9, so that means loud and clear, very, very good readability, very good signal. If I'm doing CW as well, I give maybe 599 or whatever, to let them know that, hey, you're sounding loud and clear, everything is good. Or, well, maybe, it's not so good, it's very, very weak, and therefore maybe we need to select a different frequency or a different band. Maybe I'm getting interference, right? So that's what we do. Give a signal report. All right. Last slide before we go into our question pool review. So we did talk about a few Q signals or Q codes. Another one that is important for our exam is QRP. But what is QRP? QRP is a form of operation or operating that uses low transmit power, meaning I am not using legal limits. So on a particular band, maybe I'm allowed 1,500 watts or 1.5 kilowatts. Well, I do not run all of that power. I just run a couple of watts, or maybe in the milliwatts, right? Just low power I'm going to transmit. And when I do that very low power transmission, that is called QRP operation. So anytime you hear him say, I'm operating QRP, that simply means that they're operating low power. It could be that their power supply only allows them to operate with low power, or it could be that they are just, want to see how far they can reach, what their contacts, where they can contact using low power, just to see how their station reaches, that they don't have to go and transmit high power, right? And of course, an amateur radio operator, there's a concept that says, you really use only the amount of power that you need to use to make the contact and no more, because that helps also reducing the amount of interference that you can cause, right? So QRP operation is using low power transmit operation. So when we are doing all of this talking and we are monitoring and then we speaking to another amateur radio operator that's operating our amateur station, we need to keep a station log. Now, in this day and age, a station log could be manual and a station log could also be electronic. So these days you find a lot of hams opting for the electronic log. Sometimes they use log4OM, or they may use one of the direct online logs, or they will use a software on their computer and even upload it to several other online logs. So QRZ.com is one of those online websites that allows you to maintain your log. As a matter of fact, on the left-hand side here, this is a log from QRZ. And on the right-hand side here, this is a page taken from a manual log sheet that you can write, notice the date, the time. Usually we write time in UTC, or what's called GMT, as opposed to our local time. Start of our transmission, the end, with frequency, whatever the frequency, 14.280. The mode, maybe upper side band. The power, 25 watts. The station call sign, and so on. And that's a log. And we do that for every transmission and every conversation that we have, all of the stations we speak with, and that's called maintaining a station log. So we have an exam question. A reason why many amateur keep a station log is to help with a reply if the FCC requests information. So if they want to say, did you communicate with such and such operator on such and such a date, or tell us the stations you communicate with on such a date and time, you can take an extract from the log so you can reply to them. So keeping a log is required. Good practice, and some jurisdictions in their regulations mandate station log. That's often so. So get into the habit. Once you become, even when persons are shortwave listeners, persons who will listen only, people, those such persons do keep logs as well. But if you're a ham radio operator with now transmit capability in these bands, even more important for you to keep a station log. All right, just bear in mind that we have 2 questions that have been withdrawn from the question pool. We haven't reached them as yet, but that's on your slide deck. So let us now quickly switch across to our question pool. All right, let's go see how quick we can speed through these questions. How can you avoid harmful interference on an apparently clear frequency before calling CQ or CW or phone? On CW or phone, all right. Well, we send a QRL on CW followed by a call sign, or if we are using phone, we ask if the frequency is in use followed by a call sign. Next question in question pool. What does the Q signal QRL mean? It means, are you busy or is this frequency in use? Next question. Which of the following complies with commonly accepted amateur practice when choosing a frequency on which to initiate a call? Simply follow the voluntary band plan. That's the answer. Okay, next up. What is the voluntary band plan restriction for US stations transmitting within the 48 contiguous states of the 48 contiguous states in the 50.1 megahertz to 50.125 megahertz band segment? So we did say for that band segment, you can only do DX contacts, or only contacts with stations that are not within the 48 contiguous states. All right. When selecting an SSB, and remember SSB means single sideband transmitting frequency, what minimum separation should be used to minimize interference to stations on adjacent frequencies? So we did say we need a minimum separation of between 2 to 3 kilohertz. That's the answer. Similar question, but for CW this time. When selecting a CW transmitting frequency, what minimum separation from other stations should be used to minimize interference to stations on adjacent frequencies? So this is CW now, so much smaller spacing, 150 Hertz to 500 Hertz. What is good amateur practice if propagation changes during a contact, creating interference from other stations using the frequency? So remember we said it's important that we act courteously. The answer is attempt to resolve the interference problem with the other stations in a mutually acceptable manner. In other words, don't fight it down, don't argue and quarrel, right? Let's be nice. Which of the following is true concerning access to frequencies? Except during emergencies, no amateur station has priority access to any frequency. You don't own anything. All right. What is the first thing you should do if you are communicating with another amateur station and hear a station in distress break-in, right? So that's an emergency. So what you do is you acknowledge the station in distress and determine what assistance may be needed. All right. Next question in the question pool. Who may be the control operator of an amateur station transmitting in races to assist relief operations during a disaster? So only a person holding an FCC issued amateur operator license. In other words, a license ham. How often may races, training drills, and tests be routinely conducted without special authorization? The answer is no more than 1 hour per week. Which of the following is good amateur practice for net management? The answer is have a backup frequency in case of interference or poor conditions. What is the best speed to use when answering a CQ in Morse code? Well, the best speed to use is the fastest speed at which you are comfortable copying, but no faster than the other person or the person who is calling CQ. Right? That could, in a way, you could say that's the lowest common denominator. All right. What does the term zero beat mean in CW operation? It means matching the transmit frequency to the frequency of the received signal. Right, so you're meeting the person where they're at. When sending CW, what does C mean when added to the RST report? It means chirpy or unstable signal. So you just add C as the suffix to the RST report or the signal report. What should you do if a CW station sends QRS? So in other words, what does QRS mean? It means send slower. What does the Q signal QSL mean? It means I've received and understood. What does the Q signal QRN means? Well, N may be like for noise. Well, I am troubled by static. What does QRV mean? You are ready to receive. So you have some little aid de memoirs, receive with a V, so QRV. QRN, static, that's noise. QRN for noise, so if you need any of those aid de memoirs. All right. What does it mean when a CW operator sends KN or Kilo November at the end of a transmission? At CW, meaning Morse code, you're sending KN at the end. It means that you are listening for only specific station or stations. What pro sign is sent to indicate the end of a formal message when using CW? That pro sign is AR. Which of the following describes full break-in CW operation or QSK? It means that transmitting stations can receive between code characters and elements. So remember we said that we turn on break-in, full break-in mode, and while we are transmitting our dits and das in between the spaces, we will actually hear whatever is on the air, and if someone transmits, we will hear them. So that's what's called full break-in CW operation. All right, let's continue with the rest of the questions in the question pool. What is the volunteer monitoring program? It is amateur volunteers who are formally enlisted to monitor the airways for rules violations. Next up, which of the following are objectives of the volunteer monitor program? It is to encourage amateur radio operators to self-regulate and comply with the rules. Next up, what procedure may be used by volunteer monitors to localize a station whose continuous carrier is holding a repeater on in their area? Let's dissect this question. So we're talking about what procedure, in other words, what steps can be used by whom? Volunteer monitors. To do what? To locate a station who is keying down a repeater. Right? So they are transmitting on a frequency, the repeater is repeating it, and the repeater is kept keyed. So we need to compare beam headings or directions on the repeater input. Why repeater input? Because that's what they are transmitting from their maybe handheld or base station to activate the repeater. Remember, repeater has one input frequency, one output. From their home locations with that of other volunteer monitors. As we try to triangulate. Which of the following describes an azimuthal projection map? It is a map that shows true bearings and distances from a specific location. Right, so remember, some maps, they're based on their projection, do not show true distances or true directions, right? They have all sorts of different projections that maps are created with. All right, which of the following indicates that you are looking for an HF contact with any station? Well, we repeat CQ a few times, followed by this is, then your call sign a few times, then pause to listen, and repeat as necessary. Okay. Generally, who should respond to a station in the 48 contiguous I say again, generally, who should respond to a station in the contiguous 48 states calling CQDX? Well, it will be any stations outside of the 48 states. In other words, distance, someone overseas. What is the recommended way to break into a phone contact? In other words, how do you interrupt a conversation that's taking place to say you want to talk with someone or pass a message or just that you're listening? What you do is you say your call sign once, and that is between transmissions. Why are signal reports typically exchanged at the beginning of an HF contact? It is to allow each station to operate according to conditions. Which of the following examples of the NATO phonetic alphabet? Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta are examples. Not Abel, Baker, Charlie, Dog. There is no Adam, Boy, Charles, David, and certainly not America, Boston, Canada, Denmark. Right? Those are not the official NATO phonetic alphabet. It's Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, Foxtrot, Golf, etc. Right? So the official or the NATO phonetic alphabet. Please learn. Which of the following is required when participating in a contest on HF frequencies? Just like any general operation, we identify your station according to normal FCC regulations. Not because you're in a contest, you don't identify. As a matter of fact, you will have to identify because that is how the station will know your call sign and log it to get points. What is QRP operations? Or operation, we said that's low power transmit operation, low amount of watts. And the last question for this evening, why do many amateurs keep a station log? All right. It is to help with a reply if the FCC requests information about your station. So we have a little bit of an announcement here. So let's just go back to our trusty slide deck and share the announcement and information. All right. So, let's answer a question. Roger is asking, is there such a monitoring program in Trinidad and Tobago as described in text? Well, how best to answer that question? So there are hams, there are radio clubs in Trinidad and Tobago, and there are hams who do monitoring and report on incidents. But in terms of the volunteer monitoring program, officially in that sense, not quite, although it has been proposed in the last rounds of the framework. It has been suggested that such be established. So I will say sort of, but not really. That's the best answer I can give you there, Roger. Formally, no, but yes, there are hams locally that do it, just not as formalized as we have been theoretically talking about. Okay. All right, so we have been dealing pages 102 to 112 in the No Nonsense Guide. This is our trusty diagram that helps us understand the difference between HF, VHF, UHF, as well as where we use lower sideband, upper sideband, where the various beta bands are located, the various amateur radio frequencies. Right, so folks, I did mention this last session and did mention too that we'll provide a little bit further details about Hamcation 2024. So this is a ham convention or amateur radio convention that takes place every year. It usually takes place very early in the year and it's normally in Orlando. So this Hamfest, as we will call it, is actually taking place next week, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. That's the 9th to the 11th. So I did mention that for next week's class, I will be traveling, and one of the reasons is that I will be visiting this event. So anyone that's going to be in Orlando during this period or is interested, you can Google or look up Hamcation 2024. You're welcome to attend. You do not have to be a licensed ham to attend. If you are, better yet, but any member of the public, I think it's $25 admission fee for the ticket that allows you to get in there for all 3 days, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So as a ham, as a licensed amateur radio operator, attending hamventions or these ham conventions, there are several of them. There's one called Hamcation, which is this one. There's Dayton Hamvention and several others. There's the Shelby Hamfest, many around the world. And we encourage you to consider attending if you can. You will meet up several like-minded amateur radio operators. You will be able to see demonstrations. You have vendors. Sometimes they have announcements of new equipment. You have swap meets or swap shops or swaps where hams will be selling stuff. You get all sorts of paraphernalia, caps and hats with your embroidered call sign. A lot of stuff is on sale, including material, training material, used, new amateur radio equipment, all sorts of things are available, electronics and so on, vintage stuff. You have little lectures that take place. There's sometimes even testing, amateur radio testing that exists as well as part of the hamventions, right? So consider attending one if you can. So this one is next week. Any hams or in the class that intend to be there, please drop me a line, let me know. It'll be great to link up one of those days, maybe Saturday will be good if you're going to be there as well. So that's the announcement for this evening. Hamcation 2024. Also, it's good to support the ham clubs that run it as well. They can do what they support to allow them to continue doing the human service that they do as well. So, folks, any other? I think we dealt with all of the questions this evening. So, any other additional questions not answered, send to this email address, robbie@9y4r.com. You can also send a WhatsApp to this number 1-868-682-2212. We'll try our best to get back to you with an answer or deal with it next week. There's a WhatsApp channel you can subscribe to that we will provide information about the course, including the links. That's something that you're interested in, as well as other related amateur radio and other weather and stuff that we publish from time to time. So if you're interested, all are welcome. You can also share this WhatsApp channel to anybody who's interested in that type of content. So yes, our next class, so we have a question, Charlie. Any date for the next exams? Local exams? No dates have been confirmed as yet. I'm sure we will be in a position in the coming couple of weeks to probably advise when the volunteer examiners have scheduled in person. But of course, persons can avail themselves of the remote proctored exams at any time online, right? So we'll be sure to advise there, Charlie. Excellent question indeed. And we are in touch with the volunteers, the VEs, and we will let them know when we expect to finish. And like the last time, they actually did a courtesy and they held a session a couple of weeks after we completed this course. So perhaps they may do that again, right? So thanks for the question there, Charlie. So our next session, yes, we will be looking to have it next week, Friday, 9th of February, usual start time 8:30. Again, subject to the internet service in wherever I'll be on that Friday evening, right? So I do apologize in advance if it doesn't work out, but we will be attempting to have it. And it will be Fantastic Friday in Trinidad and Tobago, Carnival Friday as it were. So that's also why we try to record the sessions. So in case you're unable to miss it, maybe you're fetting, you can always review it afterwards. But we will try our best to have this session. And that is just to try and finish up as soon as we can, because there are many persons who are waiting an exam, many persons who would like to take it. And the sooner that we can finish the course, I think the better, right? So again, no one will miss out. The recordings have stuck so far, and hopefully all of them will, and you can always look back at your leisure. No one has to miss out. So folks, thank you so much also for the extra time. Didn't expect to go that long this evening as well, but we ended up doing so. And we will see you next week, God's willing. Take good care. Be safe, everyone. Have a good night and a great weekend. Stay safe. Watch that Saharan dust if you're in Trinidad and Tobago or part of the wider Caribbean. Stay safe.